The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the same casualness as any other piece of mail. But inside, folded between official military letterhead, was the news that would shatter what remained of my carefully constructed peace. Sergeant Martinez, my spotter, my friend, had taken his own life in his garage in Phoenix. No note, no explanation, just silence where there used to be laughter. My name is David Richardson, and I'm 47 years old. I served 2 tours in Iraq between 2005 and 2008, back when Fallujah was still a name that made seasoned soldiers go quiet. I was 29 when I first deployed, fresh-faced despite my years, married to Sarah for 3 years with a 2-year-old daughter named Emma, who barely knew her father's face without desert camouflage. Now, 15 years later, I sit in my workshop behind our house in suburban Virginia, surrounded by half-finished furniture projects and the lingering smell of wood stain, trying to make sense of how we carry the weight of what we've seen. The letter about Martinez sits on my workbench, creased from my repeated readings, and I find myself thinking about eyes, how they hold memory, how they recognize truth even when the mind refuses to accept it. The day I saved the boy was October 15, 2007. I remember because it was Emma's 4th birthday, and I'd missed it. We were on a patrol through a village outside Ramadi when the IED went off. The blast threw our Humvee sideways, and when the ringing in my ears finally stopped, I could hear children crying. Martinez was already pulling security, his rifle trained on the rooftops while Medic Thompson worked on our driver's shrapnel wounds. But I heard something else, a different kind of crying, one that cut through the tactical chatter and the smell of burning metal. It was coming from a collapsed building about 50 meters to our right. "Richardson, where are you going?" Lieutenant Cooper's voice crackled through my headset. "There's someone in there, sir, a kid." I didn't wait for permission. In Iraq, you learn to trust your instincts or you learn to die. The building had taken a direct hit from something, maybe the same IED, maybe mortar fire from earlier that morning. Half the roof had caved in, and I could see a small hand sticking out from under a pile of concrete blocks and twisted rebar. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, dark hair matted with blood, olive skin pale with shock. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold, wide, dark brown, filled with terror but also something else. Recognition maybe, or maybe just the universal language of one human being asking another for help. He was speaking in Arabic, rapid and panicked, words I couldn't understand but didn't need to. I've held enough dying people to know when someone is asking if they're going to be okay. I knelt beside him, trying to assess his injuries while keeping one eye on the street. "Hey buddy," I said softly, the same tone I used with Emma when she woke up from nightmares. "You're going to be okay. I'm going to get you out of here." His leg was pinned under a concrete block that had to weigh 300 pounds. Blood was pooling beneath him, and I could see bone through the tear in his pants. But he was conscious, and his eyes never left mine as I worked to free him. Martinez appeared beside me, along with Thompson. "Jesus, Richardson, we need to move. Intel says there's another cell operating in this sector. I need 2 more minutes." "We don't have 2 minutes." But Thompson was already unpacking his medical kit, and together we managed to shift enough debris to pull the boy free. His scream when we moved his leg will follow me to my grave, not because it was particularly loud or terrible, but because of how it stopped. Mid-cry, he looked at me again, with those same dark eyes, and something passed between us. Trust maybe, or just exhaustion. We carried him to the Humvee, Thompson working to stabilize his leg while I held his head steady. The boy's lips were moving, but I couldn't tell if he was praying or just trying to stay conscious. His small hand gripped my uniform, with surprising strength. "What's your name?" I asked, though I knew he probably didn't speak English. But he surprised me. "Omar," he whispered, the word barely audible over the engine noise. "Omar, that's a good name." "I'm David." "You're going to be fine, Omar. I promise." I don't know why I made that promise. In Iraq, you learned not to make promises you couldn't keep. But something about those eyes, The way they looked at me with such desperate hope made me want to believe it myself. We got him to the field hospital at Forward Operating Base Liberty, where the surgeons worked for 6 hours to save his leg. I stayed as long as I could, until Cooper ordered me back to base for debriefing. But I kept thinking about Omar, wondering if he'd walk again, if he'd remember the American soldier who pulled him from the rubble. The next morning I went back to check on him. The doctors said he'd been transferred to a civilian hospital in Baghdad, that his family had been located. Before he left though, he'd asked one of the interpreters to give me something, a small wooden cross, roughly carved, probably by his father or grandfather. He wanted you to have this, the interpreter, a middle-aged Iraqi man named Hakim, told me. He said to tell you that Allah brought you to him that day, that you are his guardian angel. I kept that cross in my left breast pocket for the rest of my deployment. When I finally came home in March 2008, I put it in a small box with my other mementos, Martinez's poker chips, a photo of our squad, a letter from Emma written in purple crayon. The years that followed were the kind that test everything you think you know about yourself. Sarah and I struggled to reconnect. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, checking the locks, listening for sounds that didn't belong in suburban Virginia. Emma would find me in the kitchen, drinking coffee and staring out at the backyard, and she'd climb into my lap without saying anything, just letting her small presence anchor me to the present. Therapy helped, eventually. Dr. Reeves, a former Navy corpsman, who understood the weight of carrying other people's lives in your hands, helped me untangle the knots of guilt and pride and grief that Iraq had tied in my chest. We talked about Omar often, how saving him had given me something to hold on to when the darkness got too thick, how his trust had reminded me that not everything in that place was about destruction. You did something good over there, Dr. Reeves would say. Hold on to that when everything else feels meaningless. Emma grew up while I was learning how to be her father again. She was patient with my moods, intuitive about when to push and when to give me space. Sarah and I found our way back to each other slowly, carefully, building trust the way you build anything meant to last, one day at a time. By the time Emma turned 16, I'd settled into something that felt like peace. I'd started the furniture business, working with my hands the way my grandfather had taught me, finding satisfaction in creating things instead of destroying them. Emma was talking about college, about studying international relations, maybe working for the State Department someday. I want to understand the world, she told me one evening, while I worked on a cherrywood dining table. I want to help fix some of the things that are broken. I looked up from my sanding to find her watching me with those serious eyes she'd inherited from her mother. That's a good goal, sweetheart. The world needs more people who want to fix things. Is that what you were doing over there, trying to fix things? It was the first time she'd asked me directly about Iraq. I set down my sandpaper and chose my words carefully. I was trying to keep people safe, I said. Sometimes that meant fighting, sometimes it meant helping. I tried to choose helping whenever I could. She nodded, satisfied with that simple truth, and went back to her homework. But her question stayed with me, echoing in the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts. When Emma turned 18 and started her freshman year at George Washington University, the house felt too quiet. Sarah had gone back to teaching, and I found myself working longer hours in the shop, losing myself in the rhythm of saw and plane and careful measurement. It was good work, honest work, but sometimes I missed the clarity of purpose that Iraq had provided, even with all its horror. Emma came home for Thanksgiving her sophomore year, with news that she was seeing someone seriously. His name was Omar, she said, and he was a pre-med student from Michigan, studying to be a surgeon. They'd met in an ethics class, bonded over their shared interest in humanitarian work. I can't wait for you to meet him, Dad. I think you'll really like him. He has this way of seeing the world, like he understands that everything is connected, that small actions can have huge consequences. Something cold moved through my chest when she said his name, but I pushed it aside. Omar was a common name, I told myself. Middle Eastern families had been immigrating to Michigan for generations. It was just coincidence. But when Emma brought him home for Christmas dinner, I knew the moment he walked through the door. He was taller now, 24 years old, with the lean build of a distance runner, and hands that moved with the careful precision of someone who understood the value of control. His leg showed no sign of the injury that had nearly killed him 17 years ago. But his eyes, those same dark brown eyes that had looked at me with desperate trust from under a pile of rubble, those hadn't changed at all. He recognized me too. I saw at the instant our eyes met across the living room, the way his face went still and thoughtful, the way his hand unconsciously moved to his chest, as if he were checking for something that used to be there. "Mr. Richardson," he said, extending his hand. His accent was American now, with just the faintest trace of something else underneath. "Emma has told me so much about you." We shook hands, both of us feeling the weight of recognition, neither quite ready to name it. Sarah bustled around us, taking coats and offering drinks, chattering about the snow and traffic, and how excited she was to finally meet the young man who'd captured our daughter's heart. Emma beamed between us, proud and nervous the way children are when introducing important people to each other. "Dad, this is Omar." "Omar, this is my father." "It's an honor to meet you, sir," Omar said, and there was something in his voice, respect, certainly, but also something deeper, gratitude, maybe, or recognition of a debt that could never be fully repaid. Dinner was a careful dance of conversation around the obvious truth neither of us was ready to confront. Omar told us about his family's journey from Baghdad to Detroit in 2008, how his father had found work at a Ford plant, and his mother had started teaching Arabic at a community center. He talked about his studies, his plans to specialize in trauma surgery, his desire to work with Doctors Without Borders someday. "I want to help people in crisis situations," he said, cutting his ham with the same careful precision I remembered from his movements as a child. I think I understand something about what it means to be helpless, to need someone to take care of you when you can't take care of yourself." Emma reached over and squeezed his hand. "Omar never talks about this, but he was hurt really badly when he was little, during the war. He doesn't remember much about it, but he says it changed how he sees the world." I set down my fork, my appetite suddenly gone. "What do you remember?" Omar looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him making the same calculations I was: how much to reveal, how much to hold back, whether this was the time for truth or continued careful silence. "I remember being trapped," he said finally, "under concrete and metal. I was sure I was going to die. And then someone came, an American soldier. He pulled me out, stayed with me until the medics came. I remember his eyes most of all, kind eyes, safe eyes." Sarah had gone quiet, sensing the undercurrent in the conversation without understanding its source. Emma was looking back and forth between Omar and me, her journalist's instincts beginning to piece together the impossible connections. "Dad," she said slowly, "what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I excused myself from the table, walked to my study, and retrieved the small wooden box from the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside, beneath Martinez's poker chips and Emma's crayon letter, was the rough carved cross that a 9-year-old boy had asked an interpreter to give to his guardian angel. When I returned to the dining room, Omar was telling Sarah about his plans for residency, his voice steady, but his eyes constantly returning to my face. I set the cross on the table in front of him without saying anything. His reaction was immediate and unmistakable. His hand went to his chest again, and his breath caught in a way that made Emma reach for him in concern. He picked up the cross with trembling fingers, turning it over to examine the familiar marks and scratches. "I carved this when I was 7, he whispered. "For my father, before he deployed to Basra. I kept it with me everywhere. I thought it was lost in the bombing." "You gave it to me," I said quietly, through the interpreter. "You said I was your guardian angel." Emma's fork clattered against her plate. Oh my God, Dad, are you saying October 15th, 2007, Omar said, his voice barely audible. "Outside Ramadi, you were the one who pulled me out." The silence that followed was profound and strange, filled with the weight of 17 years and all the paths that had led us back to this moment. Sarah was crying quietly, her hand pressed to her mouth. Emma was staring at both of us with wonder and disbelief, trying to process the impossibility of it all. But Omar and I just looked at each other across the table, two men who had shared a moment of absolute trust in the worst place on earth, and somehow found our way back to each other through love and time and the mysterious mathematics of fate. "I kept my promise," I said finally. "You were fine." He laughed then, a sound that carried both joy and pain, and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "You did more than that, you gave me back my life. And now," he looked at Emma, his face soft with love and amazement, "now you've given me a family." Later that evening, after Sarah had gone to bed still shaking her head in wonder, Emma found me in my workshop. I was pretending to organize tools, but really I was just standing there thinking about circles and consequences and the strange ways that grace can work in the world. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked, settling onto the stool beside my workbench. "I'm trying to figure out how to feel about all this," I admitted. "It's like the universe is trying to tell me something, but I'm not sure what." She was quiet for a moment, studying my face the way she used to when she was little, and trying to decode my moods. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think maybe this is what healing looks like, not forgetting what happened, but finding out that the good things you did matter more than you knew. That boy you saved grew up to be the man I love. That has to mean something." I thought about Martinez, about the letter that had started this day, about all the ways that war follows you home and changes shape but never really leaves. But I also thought about Omar's steady hands and his plans to help people, about Emma's fierce intelligence and her desire to fix broken things, about the cross that had traveled from Baghdad to Virginia and back to the hands that had made it. "Maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe it means that sometimes the most important thing you do is something you never know you're doing until years later." Emma hugged me then, fierce and proud, and I held her close and marveled at the thought that this extraordinary young woman was mine to love and protect, that she had somehow found her way to the boy I'd pulled from the rubble all those years ago, that the circle was complete in ways I could never have imagined. Over the months that followed, Omar became a regular presence in our home. He and I talked often about Iraq, about the weight of memory and the possibility of redemption. He told me about his nightmares, about the phantom pain in his leg that still woke him sometimes, about his determination to use his surgical skills to help people the way I had helped him. "I dream about that day sometimes," he said one afternoon, while we worked together on a bookshelf for Emma's apartment. "But they're not bad dreams anymore. In them I see your face, and I remember that there are people in the world who will risk everything to help a stranger." I watched him measure twice and cut once, his movements careful and precise, and I saw the boy he'd been and the man he'd become, and I felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't even realized was still moving. When he asked for Emma's hand in marriage on a warm evening in May, he did it formally, the way his father had taught him, but with his own words and his own heart behind them. "Mr. Richardson," he said, "I want to marry your daughter. I want to spend my life taking care of her the way you took care of me that day in Iraq, with everything I have, with no hesitation, with all the love I'm capable of." I looked at this young man who had somehow circled back into my life, who carried my daughter's heart and his own scars with equal grace, and I felt the last piece of something long broken slide back into place. "Son," I said, "I can't think of anyone I'd rather trust her with." They were married on a crisp October day, exactly 20 years after the bombing that had brought us together. During the ceremony, as I walked Emma down the aisle toward the man whose life I'd saved without knowing I was saving my own daughter's future, I thought about Martinez and all the soldiers who hadn't made it home, about the weight of survival and the responsibility that comes with being given more time. In his toast at the reception, Omar spoke about fate and second chance, about how love can grow in the most unlikely soil, about the mysterious ways that grace works in the world. But what I remembered most was the moment when he looked at me across the room full of family and friends and said, "Thank you for teaching me that there are angels in the world, and that sometimes they wear uniforms and carry rifles and show up exactly when you need them most." Later, as I danced with my daughter to the same song Sarah and I had chosen for our own wedding 25 years ago, Emma whispered in my ear, "Are you happy, Dad?" I looked across the dance floor at Omar, laughing with Sarah and his parents, his face bright with joy and possibility, and I thought about the long road that had led us here, through war and peace, loss and recovery, the patient work of healing, and the surprising gift of redemption. "Yeah, sweetheart," I said, "I'm happy, I'm finally happy," and for the first time in 20 years, I meant it completely. The eyes that had haunted my dreams were filled with laughter now, and the boy I'd saved had grown into a man who would save others, and my daughter was dancing in the arms of someone who understood the true weight of love and second chances. The circle was complete, and it was beautiful.